Need a minute? All right. All right, it being 7 o'clock, I hereby call to order this meeting of the Kenmore Planning Commission. For this meeting, there will not be an opportunity for verbal citizen comment. Written comments are welcome and have been and should be and have been mailed to the Planning Commission at City Hall, so we've received those. The next item on the agenda is approval of the April 3rd Planning Commission meeting minutes. Do I hear a motion to approve or amend?
So moved.
Do I hear a second? Any discussion? All in favor of approving the minutes, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, raise your hand and say nay. Any abstentions? The ayes have it. The minutes are approved. Next item on the agenda is Housing Strategy Plan, Preserving Existing Affordable Housing. I invite the city staff and their consultants to the presentation table.
Good evening, Planning Commission. So I think the majority of the meeting tonight will be your discussion of the options for the mobile home park communities and assigning those options based on the criteria. Before we get to that, I think Laurie would just like to give a little brief introduction. So I'll turn it over to Laurie. Thank you.
Laurie.
Good evening. So I wanted just to say a couple comments about public comment and then a few other remarks. So an email was sent out to you today that included all of the correspondence received since the end of last week when you received your packet. So I wanted to call that to your attention. Hopefully you've already seen that. And I also wanted to let those in the audience know that there are comment sheets available at the back table for those present who wish to comment, as there's no opportunity for verbal comment tonight. As Debbie mentioned, the goal for this evening is to make the preliminary recommendations for the manufactured housing communities. And these recommendations will be the subject of your public hearing scheduled for May 15th and 16th. You recall we're doing it over 2 nights to accommodate the number of people we expect. Then the Commission will have another opportunity to look at the recommendations after considering all of the public input before that final recommendation is forwarded to the City Council. So hopefully you have the tools you need to make recommendations for all of the 6 manufactured housing communities this evening. You've heard from many different perspectives, residents and property owners. And as you recall at your last meeting, we summarized the public involvement process. We've also provided what we hope is a wealth of data to give you an understanding of the possible approaches. So the criteria that you approve to make your recommendations are included as Attachment 1 to the staff memo. And Attachment 2 contains the descriptions of the 5 possible scenarios that you had developed. Attachment 3, and I'm going to call that up here. Maybe. Attachment 3 was the worksheet we sent out to help you organize your recommendations. And under each option, we had listed 2 distinct set of actions. One is city code and regulatory actions. The other one is direct assistance tools. Again, those will primarily be up for discussion by the City Council. So there's a separate row, as you can see, for city code regulatory actions in blue, direct city assistance in black. And we thought it might be helpful to focus first on which zoning or regulatory actions fit best with each community. So with that, we'll turn it over to you all for your discussion.
Thank you, Laurie. And I looked at some of the emails that came in since the packet was sent to us, and I saw some comments. Most of them were from the residents. And there are residents who are asking the city not to close the mobile home parks. And again, I think that's a misunderstanding. So I know you've already spoken to that before, but I think it'd be helpful if you again summarized the context in which we're deciding this and the role the city is playing in this.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. We also have a frequently asked questions sheet at the back that provides a little more background on the project. But under the current city regulations, there is nothing that addresses closure of a mobile home community. And the city does not own those properties, so the city has no control over what a property owner may wish to do on their property. So as part of 2017 Housing Strategy Plan adopted by the City Council, the Planning Commission was tasked with looking at ways to preserve affordable housing or preserve affordability. And that is why the project is before the Planning Commission. So hopefully all of the options that the Commission is considering would be better than the current status quo, where there is nothing that addresses closure, and that there might be options to prevent closure or to delay closure or to mitigate closure. So is that
right.
adequate?
That is. Thanks.
Okay.
And then, yeah, let me first invite anybody else on the commission if they have any comments with respect to our plan tonight. So get that on the table if you want to clear anything up or you had questions about how we're going to do this. There being none, I think staff has spelled it out pretty well for us. In fact, you know, I guess we still have to decide, are we going to go through attachment 3, the worksheet, and then look at each mobile home park? And by the way, my preference would be, we've used 2 or 3 labels to describe these properties. There's manufactured home communities, there's manufactured homes parks, there's mobile home parks, and we've kind of wrestled with this. And I know there's some people say, well, it's important to call it manufactured homes, and I can understand that. But now we got different acronyms going back and forth. We were using MHP for a long time, and it could be manufactured home park or mobile home park.
Right.
And I looked at the case that Ishbel Dickens provided with her email and position on this, which was well written, by the way. And the Ninth Circuit kept referred to it as MHPs. So I think it's less confusing. And I'm not sure, maybe I don't know if it's the most popular or whatever acronym to use, but when you say mobile home park or MHP or manufactured home park, I'm pretty sure everybody knows what we're talking about.
Right. All the terms are synonymous.
They are, but they get confusing because when you talk manufactured homes, a lot of them aren't in mobile home parks.
Right.
So.
If the Planning Commission wants to pick the term, that's fine, and we'll just adjust everything
okay with
to
that?
match that.
MHP? I prefer it because I think it reduces confusion on this. But then the question is, we could go, and I'm saying this to my colleagues on the commission, through each option, although we've already done that, or we could go through the worksheet, because we pretty much, this option list, attachment 2, summarizes our proposals. And the criteria for evaluation we went over at the last meeting. We agreed on this criteria. So I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on that unless people want to talk about how the staff has filled in that criteria. I think maybe the most efficient way is to look at attachment 3 and each mobile home park and see how the criteria applies to each park. Does that strike people as efficient? All right. So let's look at attachment 3. And let's start with, why don't we start with option 1 and decide which parks option 1 is well suited for or not suited for. Lori, do you want to summarize option 1 just so everybody in the room kind of has a sense of?
Sure, and I'll also point out to the audience that the table they're working off of, attachment 3, is up on the screen, so you can follow along. So option 1 we've called long-term preservation through the purchase of development rights, through buying development rights, which would mean that there would be either an overlay zoning or a covenant placed over the mobile home park property, and then either a fee in lieu program or a transfer of development rights, a TDR program, would be put in place. So those are the city code or regulatory actions that would be associated with that.
Let me propose one thing. I thought we dealt with covenant versus zoning overlay at the last meeting, and there was a preference on the commission to go with zoning overlay because covenants are so permanent and require agreement on both sides, the owners and the city, if they're entering into a covenant that applies and it's on the title of the property. That's a difficult thing to amend.
Well, I think the issue here with whether it was a covenant or an overlay is that if you are paying a property owner for their development rights, which would be what would be happening, that you would then take a covenant in exchange for this monetary value that you have given to the property owner.
Couldn't the zoning overlay
The zoning
impose that?
overlay, to do a zoning overlay, you have to provide at least, I don't know that you can do a zoning overlay where mobile home park is the only use allowed in the overlay. It seems to me that there has to be some sort of another list of uses or something like that to avoid problems about the zoning. So if we were giving somebody money to preserve the mobile home park, why wouldn't we preserve the mobile home park in perpetuity?
Well, isn't that one of the issues? Was it, to make, if you had an agreement with an owner and they would get fee in lieu or TDR credits, then you'd have the owner sign a covenant by which the property could never be used for a different use.
Again, those covenants are for some period of time.
That's it.
50 years.
You said perpetuity. That kind of.
Okay. Yeah, it would be I assume, be
That
like other
essentially means
affordable
forever.
covenants covenants. Right, I know what
Okay. Well,
I'm sorry.
some people may
50 years is our standard affordable housing
Yeah.
covenant.
All right. Anybody have any concerns about covenant? I mean, or am I the only one who thinks it's such a, it's just, for one sale, getting fee in lieu, and then 50-year covenant, just strikes me as kind of disproportionate. Is there a way we can modify that? I was thinking that could the zoning overlay just refer to agreement? It doesn't impose the sole use as...
Right. So the
park,
zoning
but
overlay issue is that you can rezone property. And so you would, again, have given a property owner a significant amount of money to preserve a park, but put in place a zoning that would allow a conversion to another use, potentially.
The zoning couldn't the zoning say that the owner has an option to, in exchange for, this form of compensation, then agree to preserve the park for that use for a certain period of time?
That would be a covenant. The way we would think of a land use covenant.
Here's the key difference, I think. The city can amend the zoning anytime. So if it decides this is not working, or there's a much better use for the city's public benefit, or we got a plan that would accommodate everybody's interests, they're not handcuffed. They could just rezone it. But if it's a covenant, they can't, I don't think. The city doesn't control the covenant. It's a binding, it's like a contract. So you can only amend a contract with agreement from both sides. Right. So if the owner said no.
So if the owner,
or the owner sold it.
Right, and if the person who bought it wanted to
Right.
change, he could come to the city, and those are the two parties. So I'm assuming you wouldn't want to change it unless the owner wanted to change it, and so then it would just be a matter of convincing.
No, the city might want to change the use. There might be, the economics might be different. The city's needs might be different. But I'm just saying, you're handcuffing yourself with a covenant. And if it's sold, then the new owner can't amend the old covenant. It's binding on all future owners, I think. That's how most restrictive covenants work. I can't come into a neighborhood that's got a series of restrictive covenants and say, well, I don't like these. I'm not going to follow them. I'm bound by them. They what?
They have restrictive covenants.
If the covenants themselves have terms by which they can be amended by a supermajority vote of the owners of the property, I will. Scott, you want to jump in on this? Because I think you've dealt with covenants in your neighborhood, right?
And last president of the homeowners association driving by saying you can't go up
Because the covenants weren't enforced for so long.
Yeah, for so
Right.
long.
But if otherwise the covenants are enforceable, a single owner can't choose to ignore them. Or a future owner can't choose to amend them
Yeah, but
unilaterally.
true, but if it's defunct,
Well, that's another issue.
Yeah.
You're adding new facts to it. I'm saying if the covenants are enforceable, and this one presumably would be, it would be respected, I assume. That's the point of having it. Then a future owner couldn't do anything about it, and the city couldn't do anything about it. They're both handcuffed, I think.
I wonder if we're getting bound up on what tool is used versus the concept.
We are, but I think it's a critical difference.
So I'm sure that you could write or think about writing a covenant that would address some of the issues that you're concerned about.
It's binding. Whatever people agree to now in a form of a covenant is going to handcuff the city and the future owners.
Right, but you could look at the term of the covenant if that was of concern to you.
And you're saying zoning can't work for this, which can be amended unilaterally by the city.
I don't think zoning can work because the property owner also could apply for a rezone. That's the issue. It's not the city that would be of concern there. It would be the property owner. If the zoning overlay is in place, you can always request a rezone. Again, it has to come to the city, but you would have paid the property owner for the value of their property and then still allow them to request a rezone potentially. That's the concern from my perspective.
can I, it seems to me that on the covenant that you got two parties bargaining, and with the overlay, the city could just do whatever they wanted
They have
to
a lot
do.
more control over it.
Well, I'm suggesting that the covenant would be more fair to the parties involved.
Well, the city doesn't rezone in a vacuum. I mean, they would have to do it with public process, just like this.
Well, sure, then,
They have to weigh the merits of any kind of a tweak to it. But whatever the city adopted in the form of a covenant couldn't be changed without
well,
the
it could-
original owners and the city amending their agreement, previous agreement. You may not even be able, in most of these covenant cases, you can't even find the person who signed it. They were signed decades ago.
Well, sure, it runs
They're
with the
dead.
land.
What?
It runs
Right,
with the
it
land.
runs with the land. It handcuffs every future owner. So
Yeah, but if I was a owner, I probably would want a covenant rather than a overlay, because then it's out of the owner's control. I mean, I think
the rezone.
the rezone, yeah.
Well, they've already vested. If they've already got an agreement, I think they've vested in you can vest in property rights that are zoned for the property once you either submit an application or enter into some form of agreement, a process. That's a key attribute of the zoning process. It's grandfathering. It's what it's based on.
Well, don't you have
Doug,
to have
I was going to say, I think what the overlay does, at least what I think Scott is trying to say, is that it puts the current resident, it puts the owner in the same position as the residents of the park, that they have no control over what is going on their property, so that if the city could unilaterally rezone the property, then they're in kind of a precarious
But that doesn't
situation.
apply if there's already been a commitment. Just like submitting an application to develop a property zone for certain density, the city can't go back and say, "Oh, we're going to pull out the rug from under you." If they've submitted the application, they've vested in the zoning that was in place at the time. And the
I'm
city-
wondering if for tonight, because you're raising some interesting questions, and you're putting a twist on it that I've never heard before from a developer. They're usually wanting that development agreement. That's why they do development agreements. But we could go back to the city attorney and maybe get some clarification on the points you have, the
I'm
questions
fine
you
with
have
that.
here.
I'm fine with that. I think there's more risk here than meets the eye. That's
No, I know. So that's what I'm
Right.
saying. Maybe it's worth
Yep.
us noting where the questions are so we
Fine.
can follow up with the attorney
Sure.
and get some
I'm
better.
fine, and I didn't mean to slow down what's already going to be a lot to take on tonight, so I appreciate that. And maybe I'm the only one who cares. And if that's the case, then we should just kill it, because I'm only one person. Go ahead, Dennis.
I'm not sure that you're the only one that cares, but I think that there are arguments on both sides, and we may want to reserve the flexibility
Yeah.
to use both. And I'm sitting here thinking, as if I were a homeowner, I mean, not a homeowner, but a mobile homeowner, I would like to know that I'm not going to have the property rezoned out from under me.
Oh, I totally agree with that.
So,
And that's why I think the vesting is the key point. Once the owner crosses that line, he can't go back.
well, the vesting, he can go back at a certain point if he asks for the rezone. That's why I'm
Once they accept compensation, I don't see how they could go back and say, well, now I'm not going to use this, or I'm going to sell it for another use.
well, like you said, it depends how many years go down the road. Anyway,
Yeah, let's set it aside, and we'll get some comment from the city attorney on that. Anyway, so option one. Let's see. Let's go through this list of 6 mobile home parks and decide is it well suited for any or all of these parks.
So
Mike,
was your proposal, Doug, to go through the scenarios and map to parks, or was it to go through parks and map to scenarios?
scenarios and apply them to a park. I'm open to whatever people think is more efficient.
Just propose the alternative because it's a finite list.
Parks. Anybody object to that? All right, so let's look at each park one at a time, and then we're going to look at each option as it applies to that park, or just one at a time? Like we look at Lakewood Villa, and we look at option 1, and then we look at the next part with option 1, and then we look at the next part with option 1, or do we look at, I think I'd like to do that first, but I'm fine starting with the park instead of the option. So, Lakewood Villa, we've got our criteria for evaluation, gives us some data about Lakewood Villa. I open the floor to any comments people have about applying option 1 to Lakewood Villa. Vice Chair.
I'll start. I think option 1 is really well suited for both Lakewood Villa and Inglewood East. There's no near-term redevelopment envisioned in either one. They both serve seniors, a really vulnerable population. I think it's harder for seniors to relocate. They're near the maximum density, and they also have a lot of environmental issues potentially with redevelopment. So I personally thought that this was especially well suited for both Lakewood Villa and Inglewood East.
All right.
For those reasons.
I tend to agree.
And just for clarity, we're Lakewood Villa for the first column.
It's on there, on attachment 3. Any objections to the, yeah, or comments in response?
I agree with
Vice Chair?
Vice Chair.
Okay. That's 3. We can do it either way. We can discuss before a motion or after a motion. It sounds like you've got virtually the essence of a motion here. So do you want to raise a motion formally?
I would actually
Go ahead, Mike.
raise the motion and I'll shoot it. Go ahead.
So is it my turn to make a motion? Or
Anybody can make a motion.
He's going to ask for discussion. I would only say by going through the 6 communities, have conversations that reflect on the motion that we may have. Maybe
which could change potentially the way.
So you want to leave the floor open before motions are made
that would be my
and sort of brainstorm it first?
Yeah.
Okay, so we don't have to amend a motion later?
Sounds
Okay. But let's just get a sense of whether we have a majority on applying option 1 to Lakewood Villa. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 7 out of 7. I think that's a pretty good majority. All right. Option 1, let's look at Inglewood East. Comment on whether option 1 should apply to Inglewood East. Vice Chair's already commented on that. Commissioner Baker?
I like the criteria that was presented for Lakewood Villa, and I think it applies to Inglewood East.
All right. Do we have 2 more in agreement on that? All right. So option 1, we have a majority in favor of applying it to Inglewood East. Lake Terrace, option 1. Comment on that?
Not suited.
Okay. You want to elaborate, or anybody else want to comment?
I agree.
You agree that option 1's not suited for Lake Terrace? Okay. Yeah, I tend to agree too. It's only 22% developed. It's not getting the full housing potential out of it. It's not consistent with the vision for which it was zoned currently. No environmental issues with redevelopment, so it's pretty well suited. It's also kind of in this downtown plan that the city council's adopted over many years, and I think it would conflict with that. Okay, so not suited 1, 2, 3, 4, 7. Okay, so we'll leave that blank and not apply option 1 to Lake Terrace. The next one is 7021 Northeast 181st Street. Comment on whether option 1 is suited for that, MHP?
I'm going with the same way, not suited.
Same reasons? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, this is going promptly. 7614 Northeast Bothell Way, Kenmore Village. Option 1, yes or no? I see a no on Commissioner Vanderline. Agree. Okay, we have a majority on that, so that one's blank. Lakewood, option 1 for Lakewood. No's, I think not. Others? Okay, majority for option 1, not applying to Lakewood. Next one, option 2. Lori, you want to sum that one up?
Sure. So option 2 was considered long-term preservation purchased by a preservationist, whether it was a nonprofit or other organization, homeowners association. The city code action would be potentially to create a fee in lieu option for other projects requiring affordable housing that then could be could help with purchase potentially.
So how does this differ from option 1?
It assumes that someone is going to purchase the park, so that it would be not the current owner, but it would be a preservation group, whether.
So to illustrate, there have been several parks bought in Redmond that the zoning was just what it was, but a group came in and bought it off the open market. And what we're saying here is that you could use an in lieu tool that from other properties where instead of providing on-site, they could provide cash to the city, and that cash could be used to help that group if they wanted to buy the property. So there's no zoning action. It's just a group comes in and wants to buy the park.
Aren't we proposing a zoning? Isn't that our goal here, is to propose zoning to the city council?
So you could use zoning for that, but you could also, for some of these, you could also use that mechanism on independent of the zoning, of the base zoning.
Right.
So it's a
So
variation on the theme.
in that sale in Redmond, how many units were there?
In one case, there were probably about 60, and then one was larger.
And what did they sell for?
It was a while ago. I could find that out, but I mean, they weren't inexpensive.
I mean, millions of dollars, or
Yeah.
And was it government money subsidy?
Combination of government and loans. In other words, there we get the loans based on the underlying cash flow, and then they got some public funds to help with some rehab. I mean, we could sort of lay that out, how they were done, if you'd like. I mean, come back with that, but
So I like the idea of the city helping the
Right.
owners,
Mhm.
the residents,
Right.
buy a park.
Mhm.
That takes, money. That's really the role the city would play, or helping with
Right.
financing or something like this. But this says place a long-term covenant over the property to preserve the park or rezone the park to provide protection.
Right, so when we help those organizations, they use public funds. Whenever public funds go into a project, there's a covenant in exchange for that public fund. And so the two, and there's usually some affordability, but in the cases
Oh,
here,
you're saying if the
right, if the transaction
Got it.
occurs, we may be able to help using these tools.
This
Yeah.
needs a word "if" in it.
Okay,
It really does. But otherwise, so that makes sense.
Right.
That's reasonable.
sorry for the confusion. We're
And the other thing is that we got, this is another one where it says long-term covenant or rezone, and we've already raised the concerns that the city attorney should address on which mechanism should be used. All right. Now that I get it, does anybody want to comment on whether this applies to Lakewood Villa? Let me raise one thing. There's another point of concern. One of the issues is, would the property owners wait for a longer time period typically needed to put together financing by groups trying to preserve existing parks? And we're not trying to solve those because we don't have time to do that. So we're not imposing some extra time to be given. We're just saying that's a challenge for this to work. Is that it? Okay. All right.
I mean, it portends that there's a willing seller and a willing buyer, right? Right. Nobody's going to force them to do that.
Exactly.
It would be fair market value. It would just, if the city played a role in assisting what do you want to call it? How would you define it? The residents or a
Well, it could be
nonprofit?
It could be the residents form an association, or it could be like the housing authority or manufactured housing group. Oh, excuse me. Who are acting because their interest, that's what they do, is preserve communities, and they can preserve affordability in those communities.
Okay, so you've got three categories: residents, private nonprofits, public agencies, and then then the word "et cetera."
Right.
That's a little scary, right? Because we don't know how far.
Well, it would have to be an organization that would meet whatever the requirements are to receive public funding, and I just maybe it's a PDA.
What are those? Is that like a state criteria to get public funding, or the city sets it up?
Depends on the public fund source. So the cities are pretty flexible on who they'll make funds available to, as long as they sign a covenant to get the use they want. The state is very clear that to get the state trust fund, it must be a certain type of entity.
These categories are already very broad. Nonprofit, public agency, residents.
Sure.
I'm not sure who else fits into that picture that would be.
That's why I gave the example. Well, we could take the
That's
just
my concern.
putting this together.
There's
Okay,
a blank
that's
check there.
Sure. Okay, that's fine. And
you don't
we
want
can,
a private sector developer to come in and say, "Hey, I qualify for this.
Well, if
give me some funding."
if they agree to
like
all,
if they agree to preserve the use.
exactly, right.
I might just.
But that wouldn't be necessarily you've got nonprofit. Go ahead, Lori.
I was going to say, I actually like the term Arthur put in attachment 3, which is long-term preservation purchased by preservationist, without defining what a preservationist is. I thought that was
I'm
creative.
okay with that. Are we going to change et cetera for preservationist?
Sure.
I'm okay with that. All right, back to the commission.
Well, if the money comes where the money comes from, and if somebody wants to sell it, I mean, no harm, no foul, I guess. I mean,
Right.
I'm a little skeptical that
It would happen?
it would happen, but but if the state's going to give them $3 million to buy a park, then
And so the question I think that's in front of you on this one is, you're right, it could come from other public fund sources, but would potentially any of that public fund source come through an in-lieu system within the city? And it would, the city would have to approve its use and everything, but is that something worth considering? Because that's where there was a local leveraging too.
Was this the one where we wondered if the city would be upfronting the money? And then
There wouldn't be an upfront scenario here. This would be, it works. In other words, right now we use the parks one of the two parks I described use state funds, but it also uses a loan from cities through the ARCH system. So about 10 cities put up funds that were loaned to the organization to help them buy it, keep the rents at a certain level, and fix up the property. So we're saying what you could do to help create a source for one of the fund sources is to have this in-lieu system. You're not guaranteeing it will be there, but you're saying it would be a vehicle that might be there.
Did you get that?
yeah, it's
You're ahead of me.
if the money's going to, it comes from
Fee and lieu?
wherever it comes from, then
Fee and lieu?
and fee and lieu, that's.
All right. Any other questions on this? Anybody want to propose whether it be applied to Lakewood Villa?
I'd say that would be one of the ones we would apply it to if we
Okay.
decided to.
Agreement? Disagreement? Two
Yeah.
votes for it? I tend to agree. That's 3. That's Mike is on the fence. Is that what that means?
Abstain, yes.
Abstaining. Dennis?
I support it. I think it fits wherever we have the
Okay.
ballot.
Okay. Commissioner Baker?
I tend to agree with that.
Okay.
You know, it isn't, these aren't recommendations like we're going to option with park. We're just saying,
Yeah, it's, and that's the thing is, well, these 2 options, but
so far,
I think the bottom line for me is these 2 parks are better suited for preservation. For all the reasons on the criteria list and all the data on that list. So, and this is a preservation technique that would give fair market value to the owners. So it balances those interests. And if the city can make it work, that's great.
I think the other point is that when you look at the issues involved with this option, probably the owners of the property would be more willing to wait out coming
Yeah,
up with
maybe.
this criteria.
Given their
because
timeline.
There's a better timeline.
Right. All right. So I think we have agreement on that one. Should option 2 apply to Inglewood East?
Yes.
For all the same reasons?
Yes.
Okay. Should option 2 apply to Lake Terrace?
That's tough.
No.
I don't think so.
For all the reasons that option 1 didn't apply to Lake
Yeah.
Terrace,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Okay,
that's
I
fine.
tend to agree.
With you.
Should option 2 apply to 7021 Northeast 181st?
Probably not.
Okay. Should option 2 apply to 7614 Northeast Bothell Way?
No.
No.
Okay. We have 4 on that one? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Are you saying yes or no?
Do not apply.
Yeah, I'm saying
We have-
do not apply.
Yes, we have 7 on that one. Okay. And should option 2 apply to Lakewood?
Maybe.
6837 Northeast 182nd Street. And I would tend to think
Yeah.
no, because of the same reasons option 1 didn't apply to the same
Yeah.
mobile home park. It's still
That's
in the
where I'm-
downtown plan,
Leaning that way, yeah.
right? But that's me. 2,
I'd go.
3,
yeah.
4, 5, 6, 7. 6.
He's still
Dennis
thinking.
Olson is,
He's thinking.
yes, in deep thought. All right. So that clears up option 2. Option 3A, Lori, do you want to?
Sure. So option 3, both of the option 3s deal with an extended period of preservation. So not long-term preservation, but an extended period of preservation through a couple of different techniques. So option 3A is doing it through incentives, and those often are financial incentives. So you can see there's quite a long list down under direct city assistance, so that in exchange for this assistance, however it is, financial assistance, then there would be a requirement that the park be preserved for some period of time. It would be an exchange. The zoning and regulatory actions that would be required probably would be to remove the nonconforming status so that there's no question about its
Right.
ability to continue for this period of time. And then requiring a relocation plan could be part of that.
Okay. Do we have any sense of that period of time? Would it be like as long as they get the financial bonuses, the tax reductions, for example, they have to preserve the use?
Yeah, I think it depends. It's sort of situational. For example, if there were a large loan to do upgrades,
Infrastructure.
upgrades, that's probably not a 5-year extension. That's
Yeah.
probably maybe even a 30-year extension. I don't know.
Right.
But I think the amount of financial assistance that would be given would be the balancing factor to how long the preservation would be expected.
Then the owners have an option whether to accept the benefit. It's not like they have to. Like the city says, okay, we're going to cut these costs, taxes, utilities. I don't know, can the city control what the utilities charge?
Uh,
NUD?
Well, we can always have an interjurisdictional conversation with
Yeah.
NUD. Whether they would be amenable to it or not, I don't know.
Okay. And then finally, we raised, one of the issues with this one is, or part of the proposal was taking a right of first refusal to buy the park.
That was not legal. We heard
Right.
from the city
So-
attorney.
So it's, but it's
My
on the
question, it's on
description of
this.
the option.
Yeah.
Where is it?
In the third bullet point on, under option 3 on attachment 2. Yeah. I wanna
Yeah,
try
that needs to come off of there. I apologize for that.
Okay. As long as we're on the same page.
Yep.
All right. Everybody understand option 3 now?
Oh, now wait
Yeah.
a minute.
Oh.
Actually, I do want to go back to that one
Yeah.
because we're thinking of requiring someone to give someone the right of first refusal to buy the park just in general. This one, it's an exchange so that you could, in fact, if you were providing for infrastructure financing, let's say, at that same time, you could, through that contract, take the first right of refusal to buy the park. Whoever's providing the funding could ask that be a
Oh.
contingency of the funding. So that's different. That is possible.
Okay. So the city provides the funding, or utility company provides funding. They get a chance to buy the park
Correct.
when whoever
the-
the owner is decides to sell.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you for clearing that up. Can
Yeah.
we make that
Yeah.
change before it goes to public hearing so everybody better understands that, because it's a little confusing? All right. So I think, any questions on option 3A? If not, then anybody, let's apply option 3A to whether it's suited for Lakewood Villa. I kind of think it is.
Why not?
The
is what-
preservation
Yeah,
technique for a
that's
property
true.
that's well suited for it, right? Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, nod 6, hand 7. All right. So check that box. Is it well suited for Inglewood East?
Same answer.
Same answer. All right. Same reasoning. Is it well suited for Lake Terrace?
I don't think so.
I agree. Any objections? Okay. Is it well suited for 7021 Northeast 181st?
I don't think so.
Okay. Is it well suited for Kenmore Village? I don't think so.
I don't think so.
Is it well suited for Lakewood?
I think maybe.
Yeah,
Okay. And why is that?
Well, because if the owner wants to do it, and it's a, they can accept it or not, and they've expressed that they may want to be in the business for some time, and maybe they feel that with that help, they're going to fix it up.
Doesn't that apply to the other parks near City Hall?
Well, I think the ones close to these smaller ones are just not really.
The 180. Let's look at the criteria on 182nd. Lakewood. It's a large park, 40% developed, so not, it's well suited for redevelopment to create more density, to provide more housing supply, to help reduce housing costs. It's near the downtown, zoned for what? Downtown residential, high density? So,
If you're looking at the one on 182nd?
yeah,
Yeah, so there was a note there under
moderately consistent.
consistency with the vision that you can do townhomes at minimum density of 19 dwelling units per acre. I think that was the standard, and so it's not it's the same
Right.
level of density as something you could do in the downtown residential zone.
It's currently at the same level of density,
Correct.
but it's not even close to getting developed, and it's not likely to if it's preserved. My thought is this option isn't well suited for that particular park. Yes, Vice Chair.
Well, I thought the redevelopment timeline was kind of key here, 5 to 10 years. So it's not under imminent, but it's a little out there in the future. And this, I see this as more of a, I don't know, sort of an interim solution, if you will, given that redevelopment timeline. So that's why I thought it might be suited for,
Okay.
for that.
Good point.
And isn't it at the option of the owner?
It is, but if the owner exercises the option, the city vision for that parcel is going to change. Unless the owner fully develops it, but that doesn't look like it's going to happen if it hasn't already happened. So I think it conflicts, and the history and the vision don't fit this parcel, or this option, I should say. So this is nearby. It's part of the downtown, what do we used to call this? The old planning commission put together a lot of the zoning proposals for what? The Northwest Quadrant, is that what they called it? And two of the old planning commissioners are now on the city council.
This would be the northeast quadrant.
Right, that's it.
Again, it's distinguished from the two parks on 181st because it's zoned downtown residential versus downtown commercial, which is what the other two parks
Yeah.
are zoned. Limited commercial uses.
Yeah, that's a toss-up. All right, anybody, go ahead. I'm leaning no, but we got a lot of leaning yeses. So let's just, unless we want to talk about it some more, let's show of hands on yes. 1, 2, 3, 5. Okay. So option 3A applies to Lakewood. All right. Option 3B.
Okay, so option 3B, let me get to my page here, is another option that would result in extended preservation. This one is different in that it's not an optional. This is not optional. This is not a choice. What this would mean would be that there would be a time-limited overlay zone preventing redevelopment to other uses. And so, again, associated with that may be a relocation plan, removing the nonconforming status. But at the end of whatever the time period is, then the property owner would receive, I've phrased it as a present. It would be a significant upzoning. It could be an elimination of affordable housing requirements. There would be something given in exchange for this period of preservation. It would be in the zoning. It would be included as part of basically an upzoning of some sort that happened at the end of the preservation period.
Go ahead.
Is 3B more predictable time limit-wise than 3A? 3A we said was sort of contingent on the type of investments that were made, right?
Correct.
3B, would we have more complete control over the time period?
Correct.
Do we have any idea what we're thinking on the time?
No. I guess it would depend on what the trade-off was that you were giving in exchange. I think probably in the back of my mind, maybe 10 years is what I was thinking of. But that's not specified. That would be something that would be discussed if this option were pursued.
One item in this description of option 4 is that for residents who want to move into new units, strike that. It was provide the current residents with a right of first opportunity to rent the newly built affordable units. That's if it's redeveloped down the road.
We're
so
on
this
option 3B.
Yeah,
We're
this
still
is
on
3B.
I'm sorry. Okay, let's go to option 3B. Right. So we see, okay, I'm looking at the list and I see option 3, but it's not broken out.
Right, it's broken out on the chart.
Okay. So there's no right of first refusal or opportunity or anything on this one? Okay.
No.
Thank you. All right. Questions on what this proposal is? Pretty clear on it? Should this proposal apply to Lakewood Villa? No. No, 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 no? No?
I'm probably a no on that.
Okay. I'm on the fence. But the noes have it. How about Inglewood East?
Same.
Same reasoning. Lake Terrace?
No.
Anybody, we got four noes?
I was going to say yes. and I will
Okay,
say
one yes. Commissioner Baker's a no.
But tell me why you're saying yes, because that might help.
We're looking at Lake Terrace.
Yeah.
When I look at Lake Terrace, and I'm not sure if there's some reason, but it seems to be fairly well undeveloped. So I'm looking at if we have like a limited period of time in which this would be preserved, but that would then make it available for redevelopment after that window. I think that's appropriate for this property.
But it's going to get redeveloped. I mean, it's a position to be redeveloped. It's underdeveloped. There's not much supply coming out of that parcel, housing supply. It handcuffs the owner. They can't touch it if they've got this proposal in place, right? It's mandatory. And otherwise, it could be redeveloped sooner,
Which
consistent
option do
with
you
the
think
city
would be
vision.
Developed sooner under?
I'm sorry?
Which option do you think would allow a more recent?
I don't think that, this notion that we increase density, people are going to come running to build, it hasn't happened with TOD and some of the other density incentives we got. So I don't think it's going to accelerate things very much.
I don't either.
Yeah, that's why I don't think it's suited for that parcel.
And it's still,
Well, it says that its current use is inconsistent with the city's vision. That's downtown.
That parcel is
Right.
downtown commercial.
Commercial. Right. So I'm a no on Lake Terrace.
I'm convinced.
Okay. 7021 Northeast 181st, option 3B, yes or no?
No, same reasons.
No, no,
No.
no, no. Okay. Kenmore Village, option 3B.
No.
No. 3 no's.
Well, it might depend on the time.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking for Kenmore Village and Lakewood, 3B followed by interim step. It's an interim.
We don't know the time period.
That's the challenge.
We just have a
Right.
concept.
If we thought about 10 years, I might say no. If we thought about 5 years, I might say yes.
So.
If we say 7.5, I don't have an answer.
Okay. Okay, we have 1 maybe, 3 no's. I think we have 3 no's on this side. So you guys are the tiebreakers. Okay, this is the 4th. All right, so that's a no. The majority no anyway. Lakewood.
Well, we got to agreement on 3A for Lakewood.
Yeah, I would.
But this one's mandatory, so I'm a no. 2,
No.
3,
No.
4. Okay. All right. That's doesn't apply to any of them.
Well, you got one.
3B.
You got one more.
Did I miss? Which one did I miss?
Lakewood.
We just did that.
Oh, we did. Oh.
Not apply.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
we have no's for all of them on 3B.
Right. Correct. Are we okay with that? Okay. Option 4, Lori?
So option 4 was the version where there was on-site redevelopment could occur, but there was on-site replacement with comparable units. That was the goal, with some sort of assistance. So there would be an upzone with affordability equivalent to the mobile home park homes, relocation plan, and here's where the question of right of first opportunity to rent comes in. And there is still a question about this. a legal question.
Has the city
So,
attorney responded to our-
The city attorney said that there are some red flags. They're doing more analysis, and they should have that information for me soon.
Okay. All right. Everybody understand option 4? These things got a little buzz going on tonight, right?
So,
go ahead.
should we then assume that we don't have an answer, or, I mean, how do we address that
Yeah.
in our deliberate? Because to me, that's a pretty significant
Yeah.
point. So how do we
What the city
take that into
attorney
account?
said is that requiring a first right to rent may be a problem, but that there are other compensating approaches. For example, as a condition of the upzone, you could ask the property owner to agree to do that, so it's not a mandate, but is in fact in exchange for the upzone, you say these folks should have the first right to rent. So that's one option.
As part of a development agreement, or
Can that be
what's
part
the
of the
what's the
zoning?
mechanism
Yeah.
for that to occur?
The mechanism would be that the affordability covenant for that property that there's being agreed to with the rezone would address those provisions. But there's sort of two flip sides that has to be looked at legally. One is the cases he was citing was the recent situation in Seattle, which is sort of a blanket application to the real whole world, where this is being looked at as sort of a public benefit to a specified number of units. So that's a little bit different story. But on the flip side, there's been a lot of issues within the Fair Housing Act where cities have actually, when they have created affordable housing in areas that are gentrifying, have tried to make linkages that units get first offered to local residents, and sometimes that's okay under the Fair Housing Act, and sometimes it's not. So it's a tricky, so the Fair Housing Act, believe it or not, comes into play on this one as well. So we have to look at both angles.
Yeah. The message from the city attorney was he thinks it's generally safe to say that the city can encourage action through incentives or make them conditions of covenants that property owners can voluntarily enter into. So I think you could get to the notion of a first right.
But that changes the whole option. Wasn't the option to rezone it?
Right, upzone it and
make
then
the
have an affordable
First
housing
opportunity.
requirement.
Okay, so if somebody submits an application, a permit application, to actually satisfy a certain density level, they would, as part of that, agree to give right of first opportunity to the existing.
Right.
Okay. Here's the one more thing. Doesn't say that the tenants would have to be, residents would have to qualify under the redeveloped owner's criteria. That's a different issue. Whether somebody qualifies to be a tenant is different than what rent would they pay. That's the income limit question. And I don't see how that's going to be legal, to require the owners to accept the existing tenants. It'd be nice, but that whole constitutional challenge to the Seattle First and Time Ordinance, even Seattle hasn't said owners have to accept certain tenants regardless of their qualifications. I was referring to that summary judgment order that came down, striking down the Seattle's First and Time
but
Ordinance.
For every unit that's created through land use incentives, you are mandated to only take people who are eligible. And the eligibility is income or household size sometimes.
There's other
Now-
criteria, though. There's other criteria that an owner has for.
Which they're allowed to still apply, right? But
Right.
they
So
still
somebody's
have to
otherwise-
screen.
They don't have. Pardon me?
So when like your unit's created through across the street, the residents have to meet an income test.
Yeah, but what about previous tenant history and that kind of thing? Or or outside the city of
Right.
Seattle, criminal record, background.
Right. You're
Do
allowed
they
to
have
still
take
look
those people?
There is varying degrees, but generally speaking, with the land use stuff, we do, right, they're still allowed to do standard screening, but they also have to the qualification levels as well. But, I mean, I think that's what the research question here is can you target existing residents because they're being displaced? Is what the issue that I think is at the bottom here. And there's mixed results of being able to do that in other public assisted situations.
Well, let's say it's legal, which I think the owner's going to have a certain amount of discretion as to the threshold they get to set. But let's say it's legal. Isn't that a big disincentive to build and redevelop if they don't get to, if they have to take anybody?
Not that they have to take anybody. Could you have a list of those existing homeowners?
Yeah.
That would be.
Well, that's what I mean, regardless of their tenant credit
Yeah.
history and all that.
Who the applicants could be.
Yeah, I'm just saying, okay, so you've got an ordinance. It says you can build way more units and make more money and supply more housing for the benefit of people looking, tons of people looking, right? That's great. But you have to you can look at the roster and see who the existing residents are. And my wish is that they'd all qualify and they'd step right in. But if you're telling the future developers you have to take them, and some of them may not be very good tenants, that's a disincentive for anybody to step in there.
So I think
right?
there's a couple of questions that are worth, again, sort of like earlier tonight, sort of looking into
Yeah.
more instead of trying to resolve it tonight. The first would be, can you give some type of preference? Second, if you do, do they have to be, A, income qualified for the affordability that's being, whatever's developed, and C, would the owner also be able to apply any other, the typical criteria they use for all those credits? So you're basically putting them at the top of the list. The question is, how far down can you sort of waive certain screening criteria? So one is putting them at the top of the list, which we actually kind of do now. People are allowed to come to us and say, I'm interested. They hear about a new building being built, and they come to us, and they identify the building, and what we usually do is we say to the owners, these are the ones you look at first, and but you get to still screen them.
Okay, that's fine.
But I think the question that we should still look into is if you wanted to go further, is that a legal issue or not? So that at least in putting that out there, if you could waive like the income requirements or if you could waive screening requirements. You may not want to, but I think you should at least know whether or not that's a choice you may have.
What? Who gets to waive what? The owner would get to waive those? Would have to
That
waive
you
those?
would, for the existing residents, would you tell the owner to waive that they could still get an affordable unit, but they wouldn't have to be income screened? Because, okay, so that's one example. And then the other is, would you ask them to also waive other screening criteria? Just for the existing residents,
And you
for
think
that one
that's-
time.
You think that's legal?
I say we should
We
check
have to
into
check.
that. That's what
So
I'm
that's
saying.
yet
we should-
another issue we have to
Correct.
put on
That's
this
what I'm
list
saying.
of
I'm
issues.
saying I'd like to put some questions on the table because there's been a lot of questions tonight.
Go ahead.
So I'm kind of jumping ahead because I'm also looking at the direct city assistance. And part of the criteria could be relocation assistance,
Oh, yeah.
which makes
It's not a criteria, but it would be part of the program, the rezone.
program so that if a given
Right, right.
there's a place where the
Yes.
some assistance in
We got to turn that off. Thank you. That's all right. Yeah, I agree with that.
So, I mean, I'm not trying to skirt what you're talking about,
No, I know, but that's a good point.
but it's just,
That,
a way to think
right,
about
right.
those things we don't.
Any other comment? Sorry.
Well, I'm sorry. I'm still unclear. So the whole point here is that there's provision for people who might be displaced under redevelopment. So the city is confident that there will be avenues to help those people get sites in a potentially redeveloped area or elsewhere. I'm still not. I'm hearing a lot of ambiguity. So
Well, it's not fleshed out. That's why it sounds ambiguous. The idea is that you upzone these properties, and then the property owner can redevelop to a higher density. The idea was that the new units would be of comparable size and at a comparable income level as the current units. There are some big ifs associated with that question. And then also associated with that were the notion that there would be some relocation assistance. If possible, it would be good if the existing residents had first right in those apartments because of this court case, Seattle court case that just came out. That's why there's a legal question about it, although, again, the city attorney thinks that there are incentive approaches or other approaches that could get you close to that. So I think you should assume that a first opportunity to rent of some sort or a first right is there somehow, and that the rest of the program is as fleshed out as it is at this point.
Okay. I guess I just hope whatever we decide on this, I hope that condition is made clear to the council. I think that's
There are a lot of questions.
a very
on
key,
this.
Yeah,
a very key
right.
issue. I appreciate we are where we are,
Right.
but
Right.
I think that needs to be just made clear in
Right.
our deliberations and to the
This one's
council.
I'm kind of fond of this idea because it really checks it satisfies all the conflicting interests here. It probably, the rents probably wouldn't be as low as the mobile home park tenants are paying now. The likelihood of redevelopment would probably be less than what we would hope. I mean, a lot of things would have to go right for this one to work, but if it worked, it would be so, everybody'd win on this. I mean, they'd get most or a lot of what they want. They wouldn't get everything, but they'd get a lot. So I feel like I really want to leave it on the table.
I agree.
But that's sort of a...
I got a question. Relocation, is that only for the current residents? Because, somebody could come in the last month or whatever and say, hey, I get relocation.
It would probably be every resident at the time the property was being redeveloped or closed, the time the park was closed.
Well, one of my concerns is that, the park owners would just not rent it out because they know they have to pay the relocation fee for somebody who moves in after this is baked in. So I would think it would be the current residents, just like on the first right of renting as well. It would seem to me that what I'm saying.
You mean the day the ordinance is passed? They lock into this?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah, no, it's a legit point. I just don't know if there's a good way to... First of all, there's
Can
a
you
lot of
comment on that?
stability in the occupancy, right?
Well, I think that given the timeframes our owners talk to us about, you might have a very narrow pool, but there's sort of a quid pro quo on the relocation assistance. The owners want to keep collecting rent. I mean, if they don't rent it, they're not getting the cash flow from that. And if you're, and at least it's a way to help them keep their place full because they know, they might see that as sort of a, because the relocation assistance is going to be linked to either the value of the in lieu fee, the value of the upzone or something along those lines. Because I think the attorney has said you can't just sort of say owners pay for relocation assistance. So it's the assistance to the owners it might be through the property, but it's through the upzone. So I'm not sure it's hurting the owner kind of thing. But given that time periods might be anywhere from 3 years to 15 years where this happens, if you make it the day of the ordinance, I think you are putting I think that wouldn't provide the kind of assistance for the residents who might move in the next 2 or 3 years and be there a while. Plus, someone who's just moved in, they've just bought that unit, and they haven't gotten the benefit of being there for very long. So I think if all of a sudden they get turned, well, there will be always 12-month notice, so you always have that. But someone who's just moved in relatively recently, and maybe it's up to the day of notice or something like that. I mean, that might be a wrinkle to look at.
Right. I was thinking maybe the date of the notice of park closure,
Right.
if there was one. Right.
Right. And to say ordinance passes in 2019, right, for example. You're going to look at a roster of all the people who live there. Some have gone hither and yon, maybe, but by the time the park notice is issued of closure and there's a plan for redevelopment. What are you going to do? The people who left don't get the benefit of it. People who moved in don't get the benefit of it, right?
Well, that's,
Because they're not on the list at the time the ordinance passed.
yeah, right, that's what I was saying.
I tend to agree with Lori that if you have a date on the date that the notice is issued, that the park is going to close, and you
Okay.
get your roster, those are the ones who get relocation assistance
And wouldn't
some form.
Wouldn't a future, like if you did have that notice go out and let's say there became a vacancy to lease that unit for whatever time was left, wouldn't the owner have to disclose to the new person that that's what the future of the park is? Well, okay. I do have another question.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is throwing a monkey wrench into this, but I know one of these properties that we're going to look at has some commercial residents, leasees, so they have a commercial business on the property. How do they get compensated if there's a development like this?
I don't think they would be compensated under this program that we're talking about.
Because it's not a housing use.
So it's not really about housing, but it would still affect those business owners. I'm just throwing that out there.
Right. I don't think it's
So,
a
It doesn't
component
fit
of this project.
scenario.
Right.
right, and business owners will have a lease period, and they're sometimes longer than regular. I don't know what they are in these properties, and so we often see that redevelopment of commercial properties have to be staged around the lease periods of the commercial businesses on property.
Okay, that answered my question.
So,
Thank you.
so following up on my issue there, on number 4, it says, provide the current mobile home residents with a right of first opportunity to rent. So is that the current, when it says current, is that going to be when the notice goes out or when the ordinance?
I think, again, it would be when the notice went out.
Okay.
Yes, Commissioner Olson.
I'm not sure that date is that useful, because it seems to me that if one is selling or moving out, the property owner doesn't get any benefit. I mean, he does if, in fact, you set an early date. But if they're selling a home, that will be built into how much the person that is selling the home would leave, because it would be a benefit to the new buyer.
How does that affect this?
In setting the date.
Oh.
That's all.
Okay. Any other questions on this? All right. Option 4, Lakewood Villa.
Not suited.
Not suited. 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. Inglewood East.
Not suited.
Same.
Okay. Lake Terrace.
Yes.
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 7021 Northeast. Yes. 7614 Kenmore Village.
Yes.
I'd say yes. And Lakewood.
Yes.
Okay. Option 5.
Okay, so option 5 is off-site replacement of units before redevelopment. This was one that you discussed at your last meeting. So this idea is that redevelopment would be restricted until the park was vacant, and that the owners, the homeowners, would have preference in basically all of the new affordable units, restricted affordable units in Kenmore. A relocation plan would be required. Again, there are issues with this approach, but it was one that you did agree to add to the option list.
Questions? No? Are we clear on this?
Well,
Commissioner McDonald?
not really, because it's not in my, I don't have it written out, and so,
Oh, I'm sorry, it's only on here.
yeah, it's only on here. So, the difference is that one's on-site versus off-site. What is that? Is that-
Right. So with option 4, it's assuming that the property owner is redeveloping on their property, and then the affordable units are provided in the new development that they are building. Option 5 says other affordable units in the city that the city has a covenant on would be offered to the residents. And then when the park was vacant, then redevelopment could occur. Again, there are a number of issues with this approach. How would the timing work?
This would be zoning of off-site, non-MHP properties would be rezoned.
There would be a requirement that they provide that those units be considered first for the mobile home park residents.
Vice Chair?
Any more, I know we talked about this at the last meeting about the legality of this. Any more update from the city attorney on this one, or is it still under?
It's that same first opportunity to rent. So I suppose if the city were taking a covenant for a new restricted unit in that covenant, it might say you at first have to offer it to some element of qualified mobile home park resident.
Okay. Other questions?
I mean, I think it's probably similar to 4, but I don't know is there any drawbacks to it? I'm not sure.
I think it's an interesting idea that's fatally flawed.
In what way?
When you go off-site, you're bringing a whole new segment of the city into this picture and saying you've got to accommodate. That's the part I like, is that residents get an option, but I think, A, it's highly unlikely. B, it's going to really potentially antagonize off-site affordable housing owners because they get fewer choices and as to who they rent to, and the timing. This is look at the issues with this approach. Can you match up the closing of the park with the availability of off-site units? I think that's like the space program, to Pluto or something. It's like wishing for everything that fall into place nicely. Go ahead, Commissioner.
When I looked at this, my thought was I really didn't quite understand. So is this saying that you would not be able to begin redevelopment of the property until the very last tenant, was no longer on that site?
What's it going to be, vacant? 99% vacant? With a holdout?
What are the unintended consequences of creating a situation where one person would just...
There's no housing at that mobile home, virtually no housing provided at mobile home park until all the pieces fall into place.
That's right. That's right.
Well, if that's the case, then it's a non-starter.
This doesn't make sense to me, how that would happen. It's not practical.
Okay. Should we go through the list or just say this option doesn't work? We could say, does it apply to...
Well, I think Carol and I were just thinking here. I would make a motion that we simply eliminate option 5.
I hear a second.
I think we've seen it.
Discussion.
Practical.
All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. Abstentions? No. Quick work of that. Okay. All right, Lori, are we done?
Yes, you are.
All right.
So what we would intend to do as next steps is provide information about what the options are, what the recommendations are for each of the mobile home parks, and then we will be sending out letters both to the residents and to the property owners with those recommendations in preparation for the hearing.
Right, with amendments according to the additional issues that we raised, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Let me ask one question. Since we had no applicability on option 3B, should that really be?
Right.
I was thinking the same thing.
Good
Dennis.
point.
I would second that if you were making a motion.
Move to strike option 3B.
Yes.
Mike is seconded. Discussion. All in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Can I?
Aye.
Oh, Lori, do you want to jump in before we
I
vote?
think this was something that it was on the list also because it was part of the council to raise some of this as an interesting idea. So you might want to just leave it on there right now to be able to at
With
least
no-
have it on there as a possible option. You haven't applied it to anything, but I think if you can kind of see it as a potential, I mean, it's up to you. I'm just saying you might want to leave that one there because I think that probably has more value than 5 as being potentially applicable somewhere.
I think you're saying, here's something that doesn't fit any park, or that the commission doesn't think fits any park. We want to have it on a list presented
Well-
to the council because they might think it fits
Well,
in
I think
a
it's
park.
I think it's part of the option. If you see that option 3, which is extended preservation through incentives, if extended preservation is something you're considering, you might want to leave that as an option to consider as an alternative.
A reason I might consider leaving it on is there was at least some discussion, and you were about to have a public hearing, and there might be some people
Yeah.
at the hearing
Who
who might
persuade
want to
us.
speak to an option.
Yeah,
So if it's out there.
good point.
Okay.
And I don't think that we are fundamentally opposed to 3B. I just think we have a preference for the incentive model of 3A.
Yeah.
It's really comparative that it loses out, right? It really seems to be all of 3A without the incentive. It's the mandatory.
That's the
Yeah.
problem. Right. But I agree. Let's leave it on the table so people can speak to it, and we'll decide later when we make a final recommendation vote. All right. Anything else, Lori?
I think so. Just a reminder that those 2 public hearings on the 15th and the 16th will start at 6 o'clock rather than at 7 o'clock.
Right.
And we're still sorting out how we're going to do the cutoff. I know you all were interested in having people speak by park, but I still haven't quite figured that out, other than to say that if we can't develop a scheme of sign-up to do that, we certainly will provide the comments to you by park. That's another approach.
Could we
For
please
your
reconfirm we
deliberation.
have quorum for the 15th and 16th?
And this is for May 15th and 16th.
Right.
May 15th and 16th.
No meeting on the 1st.
Right.
I think I'm available. Anybody not available?
I'm not.
Okay, you're out. We got 6. We got 5.
14th, I'm,
You're tied up.
15th
For
and
the
16th.
15th and 16th.
15th and 16th.
Yeah.
The 16th.
You're tied up.
You're tied up?
I might be able to move that, though, so.
Okay.
I'm with me.
So we got a quorum.
Okay.
And we got kind of a short time period to work with, so I think we got to go with it.
Will that be streamed?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
I may be available at least to, if not participate. It's mostly public
It's mostly
comment
listening.
so I
Yeah.
may be able
Right.
to listen. I'll just be out of
Right.
town.
Right. And the recording also is on the city's website, so even if you didn't want to watch it as it's streamed, the recording is available, so you could listen to that before the June meeting where you would revisit your recommendations in light of the public testimony. That helps.
All right. That wraps everything up. Okay. Any announcements? Any new business? There being none, I hereby adjourn this meeting.